need to get this off my chest because it's been eating away at me for weeks now. I can't stop thinking about how close I came to something truly horrific, and writing this out feels like the only way to process what happened. 3 months ago, I took a road trip to Denver for what was supposed to be a fresh start. I'd been struggling with some personal demons for the better part of 4 years, specifically an on and off dependency on prescription painkillers that started after a back injury. I'd have stretches where I was clean, feeling good, convinced I had it beat. Then something would trigger me and I'd slip back into old patterns. The drive from Phoenix was brutal. Nearly 1,800 miles of highway, rest stops, and gas station coffee. By the time I rolled into the city limits, I was physically and mentally exhausted. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, one of those places with flickering neon signs and paper-thin walls. I remember sitting on the edge of that scratchy comforter, staring at the water-stained ceiling and feeling completely hollow. That's when the craving hit me, not gradually but like a wave crashing over my head. In my weakest moments, my brain does this thing where it convinces me that just one more time won't hurt, that I can control it, that I deserve relief after such a hard journey. I know how pathetic that sounds. I've beaten myself up over it every single day since. I opened my laptop and did something incredibly stupid. I went to one of those classified ad websites where people post all sorts of things, and I made a vague post in the personal section. I didn't spell anything out explicitly. I just used certain phrases that people in that world would understand. I told myself I was just looking, that I probably wouldn't go through with it. The responses started trickling in within an hour. Most of them were obviously scams or bots, the kind of messages that immediately set off red flags. A few seemed semi-legitimate, but the conversations would peter out after a message or two, either because they got suspicious of me or I got suspicious of them. I was about to give up and close my laptop when a new email came through. This one was different. The tone was professional, almost businesslike. The sender didn't waste time with small talk or try to sound overly friendly. He simply stated what he had available and left a phone number, suggesting we could discuss details more privately. Reading something about the straightforward approach made it seem more legitimate than the others. I stared at that phone number for probably 10 minutes, my thumb hovering over the call button. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to delete the email and go to sleep, but addiction doesn't listen to rational thoughts. I made the call. A man answered on the third ring. His voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice that immediately puts you at ease. He could have been someone's uncle or a high school teacher. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. He explained what he had, quoted prices that seemed reasonable, and suggested we meet in person. When I hesitated, he actually seemed to anticipate my concerns. He proposed meeting at a coffee shop downtown, a chain place that would have plenty of people around. Or he walked me through exactly how the exchange would work, making it sound as safe and simple as possible. He even volunteered his description first, a tall guy with a beard and glasses, probably wearing a gray jacket. I gave him mine in return, though I kept it vague. We set a time for 2 hours later, which would put us there around 9 in the evening. After hanging up, I felt this weird mix of relief and anxiety. I grabbed my keys and headed out to my car. The address he'd given me was for a shopping center on the east side of the city, about 20 minutes away. I plugged it into my phone's GPS and started driving. The Denver streets were confusing to navigate, nothing like the grid system I was used to back home. About 10 minutes into the drive, I took a wrong exit off the interstate and found myself in an unfamiliar neighborhood. I pulled up to a red light, cursing under my breath, trying to figure out how to get back on track. While I was sitting there, I glanced at my phone to check the GPS. That's when I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The email signature had a name attached to it. Something generic, like Michael Thompson or David Williams. I can't remember the exact name now, because my brain has tried to block out a lot of the details, but it was one of those everyman names that could belong to anyone. At first, I didn't think much of it. Obviously, it had to be fake. Nobody would use their real name for something like this. But then this nagging feeling started creeping up my spine. Something felt off, though I couldn't articulate what. The light turned green, and I continued driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling. When I was about 5 minutes from the meeting spot, I pulled into a gas station parking lot. I told myself I just needed a minute to collect my thoughts, to make sure I really wanted to go through with this. I opened my phone's browser and, almost without thinking about it, typed the name from the email into the search bar. I expected nothing to come up, or maybe a few random social media profiles of people with the same name. Instead, the results loaded, and I saw several entries, a couple of professional networking sites, a Facebook profile, normal stuff. I was about to close the browser and continue driving when my eyes caught something further down the page. 2 words that made my blood run cold: sex offender registry. My hands started shaking as I clicked the link. The page loaded slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. When it finally appeared, I saw a photograph and a detailed criminal record. The man in the picture matched the description he'd given me over the phone: tall, beard, glasses. But it was the details beneath the photo that made me feel physically sick. He'd been convicted on multiple counts of sexual assault. The summary described how he had drugged at least 4 women over a span of several years, assaulting them while they were incapacitated. The most recent conviction was only 18 months old. He'd served a minimal sentence and was now out on parole. I sat in that gas station parking lot, staring at my phone screen, unable to process what I was reading. My first thought was that it had to be a coincidence, a different person with the same name, but the physical description matched too perfectly. And then I remembered how insistent he'd been about meeting in person, how he'd made it all sound so safe and reasonable. I checked the time. I was supposed to meet him in less than 10 minutes. Every instinct told me to turn around and go back to the motel, but some morbid curiosity mixed with disbelief pushed me forward. I drove the remaining distance to the shopping center, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I pulled into the parking lot, I chose a spot far from the coffee shop entrance, partially hidden behind a larger vehicle. I sat there with my engine running, watching the entrance. People were coming and going, normal folks getting their evening coffee. Everything looked so ordinary, so safe. I almost convinced myself I'd made a mistake, that I looked at the wrong person. Then I saw him. He walked past my car, not more than 15 feet away. Gray jacket, beard, glasses. Exactly as described. Exactly like the photo on the registry. He moved with casual confidence, like he'd done this 100 times before. He pulled open the coffee shop door and went inside, presumably to look for me. I didn't hesitate. I put my car in reverse, backed out of the spot, and drove away as fast as I could without drawing attention. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely grip the steering wheel. I made it about 2 blocks before I had to pull over, because I couldn't see through the tears. I sat in my car on some random side street and completely broke down. I cried for probably an hour, maybe longer. I cried because of how close I'd come to walking into that coffee shop. I cried thinking about what he might have done to me. I cried because my addiction had brought me to a point where I'd put myself in such a vulnerable position. I cried for the women he'd hurt and for whatever other victims might have fallen for the same trap. The next morning, I looked up local support meetings and found one that started at noon. I walked in, introduced myself, and told a room full of strangers that I needed help. That was 3 months ago. I've been clean since that night, attending meetings regularly, working with the sponsor, finally taking my recovery seriously. I still think about what could have happened. The registry listing mentioned his method was to drug his victims. I wonder if whatever he was planning to sell me was even real, or if it was just bait. I wonder how many other desperate people he'd contacted through those ads. I wonder if I should have reported it to the police, though I don't know what I would have said that wouldn't incriminate myself. What haunts me most is how close I came. If I hadn't taken that wrong exit, I might not have had those extra few minutes sitting at the light. If I hadn't noticed the name in the email, I never would have searched for it. If the registry result had been one more scroll down the page, I might have missed it entirely. So many tiny variables that could have changed everything. I'll never know for certain what his intentions were that night. Maybe I'm wrong, and he really was just trying to make a sale. But my gut tells me otherwise. My gut tells me I barely escaped something much darker than a simple transaction. So to that man, whoever you are, let's not meet again. And to anyone reading this who might be struggling with similar demons, please learn from my mistake. No moment of weakness is worth your safety or your life. When I was 26, I was living in Chicago and desperately hunting for work. My savings account was hemorrhaging money. My roommate was getting irritated about late rent, and I was applying to literally anything that seemed remotely legitimate. That's how I ended up responding to a posting on an online classified site about an executive assistant position for someone who managed precious gem imports. The listing was vague in that way. That should have been my first warning sign, but it mentioned the person was married with children and included what appeared to be a legitimate business registration number that I actually looked up. I sent in my application on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Wednesday morning, my phone was ringing with an unfamiliar number. The man on the other end had a professional demeanor. Spoke clearly about needing someone to help coordinate his travel schedule and manage correspondence during business trips to various trade shows. He mentioned meetings in Los Angeles, Miami, and internationally. The pay he quoted was almost double what I'd been making at my previous job. He asked standard interview questions about my availability, my comfort with travel, my organizational skills. Nothing he said triggered any alarm bells. He sounded like any other businessman I dealt with in my professional life. He asked me to come meet him at his office in the city's jewelry quarter, which made complete sense given his line of work. The area was known for having dozens of gem dealers, watch repair shops, and precious metal traders, all crammed into a few blocks of older buildings downtown. I'd walked through the neighborhood before and always noticed the heavy security, the reinforced doors, the cameras everywhere. When you're dealing with millions of dollars in portable, valuable merchandise, you take precautions. I showed up on Friday afternoon wearing my best interview outfit, carrying copies of my resume and a leather portfolio. The building itself was one of those early 20th century structures with ornate stonework on the exterior, but clearly updated security systems. I had to be buzzed in through the main entrance, and there was a security guard stationed in the small lobby who checked my ID against the visitor list. So far, everything seemed professional and legitimate. I took the elevator to the 9th floor, and that's when things started feeling slightly off. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, one with thick doors every few feet, each one equipped with multiple locks and what looked like reinforced frames. There were no windows, no natural light, just fluorescent tubes that hummed overhead. Every single door was closed, and I couldn't hear any sounds of people working. No voices, no phones ringing, nothing. The silence was heavy and unnatural for a weekday afternoon in what was supposedly a busy commercial building. I found the suite number he'd given me and knocked. He opened it almost immediately, like he'd been waiting right on the other side. He was a man in his 50s with a thick beard and wore traditional religious clothing. He smiled broadly and gestured for me to come inside. The first room was tiny, barely an entryway, and I watched as he closed the door behind me and engaged 2 separate deadbolts. He said something about security protocols and moved to another door, this one also requiring a key. We went through it into a slightly larger room that appeared to be a waiting area, though there were no chairs, just empty space. He locked that door behind us too. I was telling myself this was normal, that this was just how businesses operated in this industry. I'd read articles about diamond theft, about sophisticated criminals, about the need for extreme security measures. Of course they'd have multiple locked doors. Of course they'd be careful about who came in and out. It made perfect sense when I rationalized it. The third door led to what he called his private office, and this room was even smaller than I expected. Maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered in religious texts, certificates, and family photographs. There were pictures of him with the woman I assumed was his wife, pictures of children at various ages, vacation photos. I felt myself relax slightly. Family men don't do anything crazy, right? The door closed behind us with a heavy metallic click, and I heard the automatic lock engage. We sat down, and he began the conversation normally enough, asking about my previous work experience, but then he started veering off script. He commented on how presentable I looked, how so many applicants showed up completely unprepared and unkempt, how rare it was to find someone who took pride in their appearance. He said I had a very professional figure, repeating the word figure in a way that made my skin prickle. He mentioned that I wasn't wearing much jewelry and said that would change if I worked for him, around that he'd enjoy seeing me wear the pieces he could provide, that I'd look stunning covered in the right accessories. I tried to redirect the conversation back to the actual job responsibilities. I asked about the travel schedule, about what a typical day would look like, about who else worked in the office. He waved his hand dismissively and said those details weren't important yet. What was important, he said, was whether I understood the full scope of the position. Then he asked, very casually, if I would be comfortable sharing a hotel room with him during business trips. I said no immediately. I said that wouldn't be appropriate and that I'd need my own accommodations. He laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. He said I seemed to be misunderstanding the nature of the arrangement. He explained that he traveled frequently, or that he had certain requirements during these trips, that previous assistants had understood this was part of the compensation package. The way he said requirements made my stomach turn. I kept my voice steady and told him directly that I was interested in a professional employment relationship only, nothing beyond standard business interaction. I watched his expression change. The friendly facade dropped away and his face hardened. His voice got louder. He said he wasn't looking for just an assistant, that he needed someone who understood what he was really offering, that the generous salary came with expectations. Then he said it plainly, almost shouting, he wanted a sexual relationship. Did I understand that or not? Was I stupid? Was I wasting his time? The fear hit me all at once. I was locked in a small interior room with this man, 9 floors up, behind 3 separate locked doors in a silent building where I hadn't seen or heard another person. My phone was in my purse, but who would I call? How long would it take anyone to get here? How would they even get through all those doors? I made a decision in that moment to not show fear, to not let him see that I was terrified. Predators respond to fear. I'd read that somewhere, and it seemed true. I forced myself to smile slightly and told him I was very interested in discussing this further, that maybe I'd been too quick to judge, but that I really needed to use the restroom first. Could we continue this conversation in just a moment? He studied my face for what felt like an eternity. Then he stood up and said, of course, he'd show me where it was. We went back through the 3 doors, him unlocking each one, and walked down the hallway to a restroom. Even that had a keyed lock on the outside. He unlocked it, held the door open for me, and said he'd wait right there. I told him there was no need, that I might be a few minutes, that he should go back to the office, and I'd meet him there. To my absolute shock, he agreed. He said he'd give me some privacy, and walked back toward the suite. The second I heard his footsteps fade, I bolted. I didn't go into the restroom. I ran for the stairwell door at the end of the hall and threw it open. I took the stairs 2 at a time, 9 floors down, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I burst through the lobby and past the confused security guard and didn't stop running until I was 3 blocks away. That night, my phone started ringing. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew it was him. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Another voicemail. I finally listened to them the next morning, and I wish I hadn't. He was saying horrible things, wishing medical catastrophes on me, wishing for my suffering, describing in detail the kinds of diseases he hoped I'd contract. There were messages where he was just laughing, this awful wheezing laugh, and muttering about how I'd regret disrespecting him. One message said he knew how to find me, that he had all my information, that I couldn't hide, and he was right about that part. I'd sent him my resume, which had everything, my full legal name, my phone number, my email address, my home address. It was basically a stalker starter pack. I tried to research who he actually was, and that's when things got even more disturbing. The business registration number was real, but it belonged to a completely different company at a different address. The name he'd given me didn't match any employees listed. The email address he'd used was from a free service, not a business domain. I had no idea who this person actually was, just that he worked in that building and had access to that office. The calls kept coming for 3 days. Finally, I sent him a text message saying I'd filed a police report and given them his phone number and that I had recordings of his voicemails. I hadn't actually done any of that yet, but the bluff worked. The calls stopped immediately. I did file a report afterward, but without a real name or identification, there wasn't much they could do. I still think about being in that locked room sometimes, about how differently things could have gone if I hadn't kept calm, if I hadn't thought of an excuse to get out, if he hadn't believed me. I think about all the other women who responded to that ad, and I wonder if any of them weren't as lucky. Hey everyone. About 2 months ago, I shared a story here about a terrifying experience I had while apartment hunting in the city I was relocating to for work. At the time, I just wanted to get it off my chest and maybe warn others, but after reading all your comments and talking it over with my girlfriend who was there with me, I finally worked up the courage to file a report with the local authorities. If you want the full context, you can check my previous post. For the last 8 weeks or so, I've been in this weird limbo, waiting to hear something, anything, from the police department. Finally, yesterday afternoon, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore and decided to reach out to them directly. I left a voicemail asking if there had been any progress on the case they told me was under active investigation. They returned my call this morning. What the detective told me was both relieving and deeply unsettling. Apparently, they'd used the information I provided to conduct what they called a welfare check on the doctoral student that the property owner had mentioned was renting the upstairs room. When officers arrived at the address, the property owner answered the door himself and immediately told them that the student had already vacated the premises several days earlier. I think he might have even provided them with the forwarding address, though the detective I spoke with was being extremely careful about what details she shared with me, regardless of what the property owner claimed. So the detective, a woman who sounded relatively young but very earnest, explained that department policy required them to visually inspect the interior of the residence to confirm that the individual in question wasn't inside and in need of medical assistance or other aid. The property owner apparently put up significant resistance to this request, but ultimately had no legal grounds to refuse them entry under the circumstances. The officers conducted a thorough walkthrough of the accessible areas and found no trace of the doctoral student supposedly living there. But here's where things got interesting. The detective told me, in a tone that suggested she was choosing her words very carefully, and that the property owner's demeanor throughout the entire encounter was what she described as concerning. I pressed her about the attic space and the basement, the two areas that had given me the worst feeling during my visit to view the rental. There was this long pause on the phone, long enough that I thought maybe we'd been disconnected. Then she continued, speaking slowly, explaining that the property owner had eventually, after what sounded like considerable persuasion, allowed them access to both spaces to verify that the doctoral student wasn't being held or hiding in either location. I asked point blank if they'd discovered anything that would justify further action. From what I understand, if officers observe something illegal in plain sight during a welfare check, they can act on it even without a warrant. She hesitated again, and I could hear her taking a breath before she answered. She told me they hadn't found anything that met the threshold for criminal evidence, and this but hung in the air heavily. There were definitely some things that struck her as unusual. In the attic space, she said there was a distinct odor that she couldn't quite identify, but that made her uncomfortable. She also mentioned seeing several large canvas bags, the old-fashioned kind with handles, stored up there. When I asked if they looked inside them, she explained they couldn't legally do that without probable cause or a warrant, and a strange smell and some luggage didn't meet that standard. What really sent chills down my spine was what she told me about the basement. She'd gone down there herself, while her partner remained at the top of the stairwell, and she'd actually taken a bad fall because the wooden steps were in terrible condition. She described them as being oddly damaged, splintered and broken in irregular patterns, with several steps completely missing from the middle of the staircase. She said it looked almost deliberate, though she couldn't say that officially. Despite the fall and the hazardous conditions, she made it to the basement floor and found it empty. No sign of the doctoral student, no obvious evidence of anything criminal, so they had no choice but to leave. This detective struck me as someone who was probably new to the job, maybe fresh out of the academy. It wasn't that she seemed incompetent, but there was something in the way she spoke, a kind of informal, almost friendly cadence that didn't quite match what you'd expect from someone in law enforcement. Or at the same time, she'd been incredibly compassionate and supportive when I'd first come forward with my concerns, which I really appreciated. When I asked her if this was the end of the investigation, she said something that stuck with me. "I'm trying." Just that. I'm trying. I got the impression that her hands were tied legally, that there simply wasn't enough evidence to pursue a warrant or more invasive investigation, though she didn't explicitly say that. She did mention that the case file was still technically open and active. Then she asked if I'd be willing to come down to the precinct for an in-person interview once I completed my move to the area in a few weeks. So that's where things stand right now. I honestly don't know what to make of it all. Part of me doesn't know if this detective has the experience or authority to really push this investigation forward. Another part of me is genuinely confused about whether I should feel relieved that they didn't find bodies or evidence of violence, or frustrated that nothing concrete came of it. Should I let this go? Should I keep pushing? I have no idea what the right move is here. But here's where things took an even stranger turn. This morning, just a few hours after my phone call with the detective, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The sender name was just a random string of letters and numbers. The entire message consisted of 4 words. Was it you? That was it. No context, no signature, nothing else. Just those 4 words. And below them, there was a hyperlink with no preview text or description. I know. I'm fully aware of how stupid this was. But my curiosity got the better of me and I clicked on it. Immediately, my antivirus software started throwing up warnings and blocked something from downloading. According to the scan results, the link had attempted to install some kind of malware on my system. My security program quarantined and deleted the threat, and it automatically removed the email from my inbox in the process. I ran 3 additional full system scans to make sure nothing had gotten through, and everything came back clean. It was only after all of that, sitting there staring at my computer screen, that a thought occurred to me that made my blood run cold. What if that wasn't just some random phishing attempt? What if the property owner had somehow tracked me down? What if he knew I was the one who brought the police to his door? I'm probably being paranoid. That's what I keep telling myself. It was most likely just spam, just coincidental timing, but I can't shake the feeling. Anyway, that's the update. Maybe there will be more developments in the coming weeks, though honestly, I'm hoping this is the end of it. I just wanted to let everyone know what happened, especially those of you who encouraged me to report this in the first place. Knowing that people out there supported me and believed me made all the difference. You all inspired me to actually do something, instead of just ignoring my gut instinct and hoping everything was fine. Thank you for that.